We've seen DePIN grow over the last couple of years. It's physical hardware that's producing data. And what do we start to do with that data? One of the reasons why you haven't seen very much consumption of private data for AI models is because the privacy preservation tech isn't there in Web 2. Our data protocol enables end-to-end encryption and control of data so that there's data provenance on-chain, and then ultimately allows that to be combined together with different data sets to build new data products that can be used to train AI.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unleashing DePIN Podcast. My name is Tyler. I'm your host, and I'm joined by two very special guests on this episode. I'm really excited for the next project that we get to have. We have Neal and Phil from DePIN Protocol. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. I always love episodes where I get to have more than one guest because it's a fun conversation. So this is going to be great. But before we kick off into things, can you guys share a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your background, and we can kick it off from there?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Phil McMannis, co-founder and CEO of DePIN Protocol. My background has been at the intersection of product, technology, marketing. I actually started off my career in Web 2 at Experian, one of the largest consumer data companies in the world. Built and sold a startup in the Web 2 space. And I'm one of those people that, found out about Bitcoin back in 2012, set my gaming rig up to mine Bitcoin, did the math on electricity and never actually hit execute, and was like, wait a second, future value of money on a scarce asset. Yeah, if I had a time machine, definitely going back. But as a lot of my background's been around product technology and data, I've been someone who's been following Web3 space for a long time and has had a career change a handful of years ago, decided that decentralized technology was where I wanted to focus, and especially how we look at handling data with distributed technologies as well.
That's amazing. So exciting. What about you, Neal?
Yeah, so Phil's are definitely our fearless leader. My nice quote-unquote icebreakers, I say I'm a self-proclaimed kind of Bitcoin boomer. I won't say when it was, but I definitely spent 21 Bitcoin on an engagement ring.
Nice.
She's still with me. So
okay. That better be the biggest diamond we've ever seen. But
so there's the pizza index, and then there's the Neal and his wife index on the engagement ring. But yeah, obviously been in the space and out of the space on the retail side for quite a while, but really focused around data management sales in the Web 2 space. And then when Phil approached me around Beacon and what we wanted to try and solve for, I was like, absolutely, this is where I need to focus my effort.
I love it. It's always good. I always love when you get people that have been in it from the Bitcoin days, and they've seen all the tides that have gone raised up, gone down, market crash, all that kind of good stuff. But it's amazing that you're here. Where did you guys first come across DePIN initially? Where did you start seeing the potential intersections of what you're building? Talk to me about how you got introduced to DePIN.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in terms of getting, introduced to DePIN specifically, I'd say for me initially it was actually it's probably Helium, which is one of the oldest, longest standing DePIN projects. And a really interesting concept of what can happen. I'm actually in Boston, and there's a company called Starry Internet that, a little bit before around the same time was doing the same type of thing of, okay, great, how can a neighborhood do some of that? And it was really interesting seeing that idea rolled out on a much larger scale is Helium. And then I think even deeper as we look at where we see the opportunities of where Beacon can really play the role there is what's happened over the last year or two on DePIN, where it used to be like DePIN didn't even used to really be a word, right? And then started to come together as more things were happening and starting to see it grow. It's been really exciting seeing all of the growth in the DePIN space and all the opportunity that's out there.
Oh yeah, you gotta love it. Neal, what about you? Was Helium kind of your gateway drug into DePIN?
A little bit. I was a little bit later, self-admittedly. It was about 3 consensus conferences ago where I started to really walk booth to booth and just have conversations with people. And I still, back then I was like, okay, this is an expression of the Web3 mantra of decentralize everything. And what does that mean? What does that mean for individual users, the use cases, the projects, like their missions and their values? Like it's almost like another dialect of the same Web3 language. Again, just decentralize it all. So I was learning then, and then the second year was, okay, there's a lot of them. And the third year, they started really mature, seeing adoption and growth. So yeah, I can't say I was an OG DePIN guy, but it's been fun to catch up and stay on that frontier curve.
Yeah. Oh, I think we're still in the early days where we're all considered OGs at this point, especially as the space is getting traction and seeing all the success that it has. So talk to me about Beacon. What is the project, Beacon Protocol? How did you stumble upon the solution that you're building? Can you just give a high-level overview for folks, and then we can get into the specifics?
Yeah, definitely. So Beacon Protocol is on-chain orchestration of data for AI. And really what that means and where we focus on when it comes to data for AI is not, building out AI models, which is what there's a lot of projects focused on that, or in the DePIN space, DePIN GPU networks and things like that. Our focus is on how do we make more private data accessible to AI for training, for inference, for things like that. For anyone who hasn't heard or seen about this, at this point, we've exhausted the majority of public data that's available out there for AI training. So when you think about people talking about AI training, you hear about things like data scraping, right? Or how, hey, OpenAI fed the internet in to build their foundational model. The internet is what you can just keep crawling that, right? But at the end of the day, that's a very small portion of all of the data that's out there in the world. And I think what's really interesting and where we're leaning into things from the DePIN side and where we really see a big application on DePIN is that there's an incredible amount of data starting to be generated by a lot of the really cool DePIN projects that are out there. As we've seen DePIN grow over the last couple of years, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later, right? How do we define and think about DePIN? It's
Right.
not just about physical hardware anymore, right? Or in cases where it is about physical hardware, it's physical hardware that's producing data. And what do we start to do with that data? That's got a lot of value around AI training as you think about making AI better, inference models, things like that. So what we've built out is our data protocol enables end-to-end encryption and control of data so that there's data provenance on-chain to understand where data came from. There's controls around accessing that data so you know that data is only being used in ways that it's supposed to be used. And then ultimately allows that to be combined together with different data sets to build new data products that can be used to train AI. And when AI trains on that data, it costs money, and that then can reward and incentivize users for participation by using all of the data provenance that we've created. We can then flow those rewards back to everyone that's contributing data and shift away from the closed off data silos of Web 2 and build more open, sustainable data economies. So I like to talk about one of the big examples a lot of people like to mention is Reddit sold all their user data to Google for $200 million. Users didn't see a dime of that. With what we're building, that is a paradigm shift that we can fundamentally change in a way that as people build and contribute data that goes in AI training, they can receive rewards from that. And not just at a user standpoint, but the protocols and the DePINs and the dApps that are building as well, because it's all of us together building and creating these data value chains, and anyone that's participating should be receiving value for that.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's amazing to think, as you said, we've exhausted all the resources with training the models. And as we're generating information and data sets from these real world physical infrastructure networks that are creating really useful information, being able to bring that and combine it, that's a huge value add that you're bringing to the equation. And obviously having the kind of the security or the privacy component to it is also really big. How much of that has factored into your kind of architecture decision with respect to keeping things private through the and an encryption, and like how important is that in the Beacon business model, if you will, for people that'll be buying it and maybe feeding it into their models? How does that? How are you thinking through that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Neal's right. Absolutely foundational. I think one of the reasons why you haven't seen very much consumption of private data for AI models is because the privacy preservation tech isn't there in Web 2. Because when you look at giving data to someone in Web 2, you are copying and pasting that data and they get a copy. And no matter what we agree contractually, it's still sitting on that data. That's why we see data breaches. That's why there's all of these problems with data privacy in Web 2. And that's why the privacy piece is such a foundational component, the encryption of the data, and partnering with a lot of the leading data privacy encrypted compute partners that we're working with as well is another key piece of what makes this function. And I think it's one of the things that tends to get overlooked a lot by people in this space. And this is where I think some of our unique backgrounds of, as I mentioned, I started my career off at Experian, right? I've seen what happens with Web 2 data, and I know how data needs to be treated from a data privacy and regulation standpoint, because that's a really big thing that's changing. And just because data is generated by someone with a wallet address doesn't mean that it's not still private data, that it's not still regulated information. And especially as we look at things like DePIN and decentralization of storage and things like that, when you're putting something out there in a way that can be accessed, you can't have raw information sitting around. That's why we don't have people, and you should never be putting consumer data directly on chain. That's why a lot of that high value data ends up sitting off chain and needs to be encrypted to be able to be secured as it's moved around, used, and provided value in AI.
Yeah, Neal, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I'm like resisting getting on my TED Talk soapbox on this stuff. It's like such a, I don't know. I'm always been a skeptic. Historically, it's probably my self-proclaimed Bitcoin boomerishness on what projects actually need to be fully decentralized, what use cases actually need and can leverage like a public blockchain. And like data management is so close to economic energy. Take your Michael Saylor quotes, take your digital energy, like taking that analog and turning it digital. So, and DePIN is very close to that, right? Because we're talking about physical infrastructure, and yet the output is a digital representation of something that happened in the real world. And it's like, how do you have that logistical supply chain touch points? How do you have that control where you can say, no, I created that, I should be rewarded for it, and have that, and everybody who touches that along the way is rewarded as they're refining it, as they're making it a more useful product. Like, it's still very much an Alice and Bob. There's just more players in the space now. And it's so broken in today's Web 2 world. Like, there's this, we talk about that wealth transfer, and take politics aside, but it's that digital wealth transfer. There's a reason there's the big players in the FANG space, because they own all this stuff.
Yeah,
I'm trying not to swear. Like, it's maddening. So
it absolutely is. I know. When I started in Web3, it was specifically around like identity related stuff, and the Experian breach was at the time kind of the hot topic. That was a big realization for people. They're waking up to see this is a problem when all of this gets stored centrally. One of the things that I think is really unique about what you guys are doing specifically is outside of the privacy component, you're creating kind of new valuable data, which is generated from real world interactions, things that are happening. That's going to create, I'm assuming, a lot of really useful information for these AI models. What are the types of data that you're looking to collect and bring together from various projects? Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, the short answer is any data, because all data is valuable. I think what's the bigger question is, what is the data, and what data is the most valuable, especially as you take a look at AI training. I think one of the most important things about the type of data that we're looking to partner with projects on is high quality data. Because at the end of the day, there is nowhere where garbage in, garbage out is more important and true than when it comes into AI model training, especially as you get into fine tuning and inference. So just to talk a little bit about AI, to set a little bit of foundational information about AI data before we dig into the DePIN side, is what a lot of people experience when they're interacting with Chat GPT or a lot of the AI agents that they're using right now. Those run on a foundational model. And those foundational models are those very large data sets that have been aggregated that have made GPT be able to communicate with you similar to how you would communicate with a person, do basic reasoning, things like that. As we start to talk about things like fine-tuning models and inference, you need to have more specific data around the topics that you're going after, or you need to be able to teach it new things and let neural nets start to learn from new data points. And while a lot of people tend to think of that as, okay, the information that's being read in an article or things like that, the type of data that's being generated in DePIN networks is equally, if not more valuable, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about some of the top tier 1 projects out there, vehicle data and vehicle telemetry, right? Mapping data, photos, weather, all these different things are starting to come together, right? Information that becomes collected from the device sensors on your phone, those all become very interesting pieces of data when you want to be able to teach an AI model about a specific thing. And to talk about one of the things that I'm really excited to see, and unfortunately we're just too early in the space to have the answer right now, is I want to see how much this data becomes worth in the long run, because we've been chatting with some of the top 4 AI projects out there that we're all thinking of our heads. And they know that there's a public data shortage, right? They're seeing that come. There's massive demand to get access to private data, like what DePIN networks are generating, to the point that some of these teams have more than quadrupled their data acquisition teams over the last 6 months. And I've been speaking with some people that have been working on some deals with them, And they're doing things like paying $250,000 to $1 million to get access to old offline content that's sitting in archives. That's crazy. It's just different versions of the same things that we have right now. So if that's the value of old magazine or old blog articles or things like that, what is this real high quality live interactive data streams that we're starting to see built in and DePIN? What are those worth? And I think that's one of the things that becomes very interesting. And one of the things that when you see people talking about DePIN becoming a multi-trillion-dollar industry, it's those people that are seeing and thinking about the data that's being generated and what bringing that data together can be able to build. And I'll turn this over to Neal because he already touched on a little bit of it, but think about the data that shows up when you go into Google Maps, right? Where does all that come from? So Neal, I'll let you touch on that because you briefly got into that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Again, we could talk for hours about this. I'll keep it short. Just putting myself in the shoes of someone who started their own DePIN project. Like we want to say telemetry data, IoT data, vehicle data, weather data, etc. Their mandate is, I want to build the best experience. I want to build the best, most robust ecosystem that rewards participants, rewards output, and rewards really quality data. They didn't. My bet is, I'm happy to lose a paycheck or a beer on this, but my bet is they didn't say, I want to create the best data set to sell to AI.
Yeah.
That wasn't what they woke up in the morning to start doing.
Probably not.
And so that's okay. That's great. But as Phil alluded to, there's these just incredibly highly topical, relevant, and up-to-date data sets. And you have to take like a first principles approach to it, I think. I know it's corny and it's used a lot, but really it's, do you believe data is important for AI growth, artificial intelligence training and growth? Sure. Equally as important, same other side of the same coin on GPUs and having the compute power to power these networks and these LLMs. Great. And if you believe also, once you do your research, okay, 99.x% of public data has already been consumed. Where's the rest of the data? It's private. It's sitting in S3 buckets in AWS, GCP, minimal blockchain-based representation. That's what that's the underserved market on both sides that Beacon's really trying to serve. We're continuing to be like that lifeblood. If data is the lifeblood, Beacon is like the artery that's pumping this and facilitating. And because of the blockchain-based orchestration and controls, we can reward those originators. We have that ability. It's not just going to another AWS bucket. It's not just going to another cloud data lake where, Tyler or Phil will never be rewarded for the stuff that they've been doing every day. And that's the beautiful part about DePIN too. It's like you're being rewarded for things you've already been doing.
Yeah. I think, by the way, that's a great tagline you guys are going to have to start using. You're the artery for the blood that's flowing with this data. That might be something to
This is rapid prototyping. Haven't used it before.
Well, you have my vote. If that's something you want to start rolling with, I would support that message. I couldn't agree more that especially the value of all of these data sets that are being collected from live inferences that you referred to, I think is going to be far more valuable and useful in the future. Are there specific data sets that you're targeting, like via different DePIN projects that you're able to talk about? You mentioned telemetry or vehicle telemetry. There's Demos, who's probably a project that you're collaborating with for getting that. But are there other types of kind of data that you're targeting right now with the state of Beacon protocol?
Yeah, absolutely. So Demo is one of our initial partners, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, how that all fits together. In terms of the types of data, I think we're pretty open and agnostic to what those types of data are. And I think what's been so interesting is we're at conferences and we go to the DePIN meetups, and there's people building DePINs with data types and sets that are being produced and collected that it's just, I never even would have thought of or imagined. And some of those aren't even we're even starting to see things. I'm thinking back to some of the people we talked to at Consensus in Austin, there were some people that were doing things like crowdsourced restaurant reviews based on geolocation we know this is verifiable because this person was actually here. That's something that, again, I'm going to stay away from getting into this right now. Some people wouldn't necessarily think of as being DePIN. As we take a look to go to a little bit more of the traditional views on DePIN, I would say take the example of looking at the type of data that Google has, separate from search algorithms and your behavioral activities. But think about what goes into Google Maps, right? You've got street data, you've got location data, you've got imagery overlays, you've got information about what's where, you've got traffic, you've got real-time things all coming together. Google has gone through a tremendous amount of effort and work to be able to acquire and get access to the data assets, whether internally or licensed from a third party to bring all of that information together. And they're bringing that together is what makes Google Maps so powerful. I'll do a little why Google Maps won out over Apple Maps. Many of us experienced and saw what happened there, right? But I think about, as I look at a lot of the top DePIN projects, all of those same pieces of data are starting to be created, right? Look at things coming from phone sensors inside of a driving vehicle. Look at vehicle data coming in. Look at weather data. Look at mapping. All of these things are starting to come together. And what's interesting is that for those to recognize the full value of this, there needs to be able to be aggregation and linking across those pieces of data. So what I think a lot of people are not acknowledging and seeing right now is, although there's all this data growth inside of DePIN, they're still in data silos. Each project has their own data silo. And what we're focused on when we look at bringing data together from DePIN projects to build new data products is bringing that data together in a data sovereign way where everyone's data still has traceability. We still know what came from where. And we do it in a privacy preserving way to be able to monetize that data. And I think there's something, one of the things that we really see Beacon Protocol providing the value of is being that place that the information comes together and the data can be linked together in a way that it's still community owned and everyone still owns the underlying data. Because if you see a DePIN continue to grow and move out into those other areas, you're just creating another Google, right? You're just creating another centralized data source, even if it's coming from multiple decentralized sensors. So that's what we really see us doing, is bringing that together in a way that everyone still maintains and owns their data. Those connections can be made. We can open those off-ramps to AI training and data consumption of these data sets that have never been available to AI before, and build new unique insights that never existed anywhere else in the world. And I think that's what's so cool about what's happening in this space, is this is never before done, seen, connected, used data. What, and where do we go from here with that? Right. There's a lot of possibility.
Oh yeah, I think you guys are so on with where the market's going, especially given the fact that you're right. All of these DePIN projects, they have a problem that they're solving, but at the same time, they are creating all this useful information, but aggregating it together, you can create sort of new types of value streams that are available for on the AI side or just other applications, which it's still a net benefit to the project. By combining all those things, you're able to do what hasn't been able to be done before. I think you guys are definitely on the right direction with that. I'm supportive for sure. But Neal, I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to say?
Mine was the least valuable thought. It still boils down to a bit of like a WAGMI. It's shifting that kind of player versus player, that kind of PvP mindset. And I don't know did you ever play video games growing up?
Oh yeah.
Final Fantasy. Like, it's kind of one project is the healer, one project's the spellcaster, one project's the brawler, one project's the damage giver. That's how they take down the big boss, or that's how they create something you can take down. Take the analogy wherever you want it, but that's kind of how we're thinking about these net new data products that we can help put together and stitch. And
that's brilliant. Yeah, I think the value there is huge. Can you talk about the state of Beacon Protocol today? I know that you've got your Eclipse Data Hub, you've got your SDK, some partners. Can you just break down the different components of where the project's at?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of where we're at today, from a technology standpoint, all of the fundamental primitives are built, and we're open for starting to connect to DePINs. Really, where the first place that's coming together is the Eclipse Data Hub, as you mentioned. So this is something that we've been building out with the Eclipse team. And the idea being that we need a place to be able to connect data from different projects, from different networks. One of the things is, even though it is named the Eclipse Data Hub because some of the core components are functioning on Eclipse, it doesn't mean you need to be natively deployed on Eclipse to participate with it. The way that we've built this out is it's about mobilizing that off-chain data that's being created, or data that's going inside of a ZK proof if you're someone that's using ZK to be able to secure your data. So it doesn't need to be Eclipse specific, but we've worked with them to be able to start building this out. The SDK is there. All the primitives are there around building data products. And really what we're working on right now is starting to get the final touches together to have the Data Hub marketplace open up. Our initial partners to talk about, I mentioned Demo. We just announced a couple weeks ago that our key partners are bringing Eclipse's data to the table and making it consumable via Allura AI as one of our first decentralized AI demand partners. For those not familiar with Allura AI, their focus is on building self-learning models and being able to have models that become better because they learn on topical data sets. That's where this becomes so crucial, right? The key word there is topical. And that's what's so interesting about all of these different pieces of data coming together and being able to train topical models and have different versions of those models that look at, okay, what is the ground truth as you ask AI a question, and being able to leverage information that's being generated by these DePINs to try and help create that ground truth. And as well, doing it in a way that inside we're able to bring data products together where data can be combined in a way that remains sovereign, both from a user and a project standpoint, and as well as privacy preserving. We ensure that if there's ever anything that has private sensitive data that's being collected, because that is something that can happen sometimes with data intentionally, right? Not even accidentally, that needs to be properly secured. And the other piece of the privacy component as well is that being able to keep data private, even if it's generic information, increases scarcity of that data. That's what's going to change the paradigm. Instead of just pushing it all out there where any AI can access it, by keeping it private and encrypted, you control access to it and you control the ability to monetize it.
That's well said.
I would at the risk of going a little technical, but Phil hit on these topics that if people are still following on that, please bear with me and follow on this. Another great benefit of being Web3 native and the way we've built this access control layer, it takes just as much effort to hack an entire Experian database as it does to hack 1/3 of one of our records. Because we actually shard the keys between personal, metadata, audience data. So it's not just Tyler. Like each of them are just as hard to brute force or to socially hack, like it's a complete paradigm shift.
And you need to represent yourself as multiple parties, right? Separate from just the multi-party computation of the starting of the key. You also need to represent yourself as someone that's being authorized to access that data, right? So it's just, from a security standpoint, it's really a new fundamental paradigm in how data can be connected and shared together in a privacy.
We won't go any more technical, but I just wanted to.
Now you got me interested because I'm all about the sort of the privacy benefits that we can start bringing as we shift from the Experian style models, not to pick on your old company, but as we shift into where it's actually controlled by users, you don't have it sitting in an S3 bucket, as you mentioned. Can you go into the weeds a little bit on everything's end-to-end encrypted, but talk through how that privacy layer is really implemented within the Beacon protocol. I think this is something people will be pretty interested to hear about, even though it's technical.
We'll go technical, but we'll do it in a technical way that we'll try not to go overly technical.
Well, you can start using the whiteboard now. You can draw.
Right, there we go. That's why I got this whiteboard behind me, right? So let's start putting this out in encryption schemas. And we already covered all of the data is end-to-end encrypted, right? Once the data has been encrypted, the encryption key, we've partnered with Lit to multi-party compute shard that key. So there is no central key store. So you don't even, to get access to the data, you need to first go compromise Lit's network. And they've done amazing things from a security standpoint and what they're able to do. You then need to bring that in and trick our SDK and be able to misrepresent on-chain records. So those are a couple things that are happening on just the fundamental encryption. Separately from that, there's a couple other things that we're doing. The first thing that we're doing around privacy is that when there's an identifier for a record created, and let's use the example of, let's say there's an identifier for a record is a wallet address, right? If that wallet address is the same across 10 different projects, and you give that to an AI, is going to be able to tie that up really quickly and get an understanding of that is. And if one of those happens to have personal information, an AI is just figured out a whole nother angle of that, right? So that's why what we do is you mentioned Tyler, you talked about, you got into space on identity. We are identity agnostic. We don't see ourselves as being a ubiquitous identity. But what we do is when an identity comes in on a record, we put a privacy wrapper around it and change that. So that same wallet address across 10 different projects will have a different value. Yet when they're connected together, the encryption schema that we're using is able to tie those up under a whole new identity. And that every time there's a permutation done of those identities being connected, there's a new value. And that blocks data recreation. It blocks tracing things back. So that's one of the basic fundamental things that we do around privacy. And to go even deeper than that, as if that's not enough, we've decided that as we look at things like compute on data and encrypted compute, our approach is that we are partnering with the leading co-processors. So those are companies like Zama and RISC-0, where we're partnering with them that on top of that, when you're bringing data sets together and you want to be able to do AI training and ML algorithms, you can bring that up using Zama's concrete ML technology. And by using them as a co-processor, we can do it in any environment. You can do it on our infrastructure, you can do it on your infrastructure, you can do it on Zama's infrastructure, or you can do it on one of our infrastructure partners that we're going to be offering. So it really lets you have control over where that's happening and let you decide where you feel comfortable with that happening, knowing that you're already, or what now, 3 or 4 layers of privacy preservation deep when that's going on. So we've really been thoughtful as we've built it out in that way and are working on partnering with the top people in space.
Wow. Yes. That's a huge benefit that you're thinking, because you're right. You put all those, it's very easy to track or link those together. As soon as you stick it into an AI model, it's going to figure it out pretty quick. So essentially every piece of data has its own kind of unique identifier that is mapped to, presumably on chain, that ties back to that data asset or whatever it may be. And that's all done on the Eclipse network. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So the records that we publish with the Eclipse Data Hub, yep, they go onto the Eclipse network. And I think to touch real briefly on Eclipse and why we've decided to build on Eclipse is that one of the things that's interesting is we actually, if we take a look at a lot of the other high TPS chains that are out there, like building natively on Solana, one of the things that becomes a challenge for handling things like data is that you look at state storage, and state storage is pretty expensive. Storage on chain is pretty much the most expensive storage that's out there, right? So that's where what's been really interesting about what Eclipse has pulled together is not only the parallelization and the fast runtime of the Solana virtual machine, but also reducing data costs by bringing Celestia from data availability. And the other interesting component of this, and why I think it's really interesting from a data market standpoint, is that the liquidity is Ethereum, one of the absolute largest out there. So that becomes a really interesting way to bring things together that I think is Eclipse. I think as more people start to build on Eclipse, they've already got a massive ecosystem just as they're launching. As we start to see more use cases on Eclipse, I think we're going to see a lot more people that are doing things around DePIN and data because it's just structurally built to solve some of these challenges around economics and scaling.
Yeah, you certainly took the question out of my mouth, because that was the first thing that I started thinking about, which is the scalability. And so it makes a ton of sense why, between the benefits that Eclipse can bring, choosing that as home base, it makes all the sense in the world. What does it look like for DePIN projects to integrate with Beacon? How does that process work? Obviously, I know you have your SDK, but for a DePIN project that's listening and is saying, hey, I want to create additional value from what we're already producing, what does that onboarding or sort of integration look like?
Yeah, we've made it super straightforward and easy. So first off, any DePIN projects out there that are interested in this, hit us up. Happy to talk. We've made it really as easy as possible. So our SDK is very easy to implement. It can be implemented natively inside an application. It can be implemented inside your infrastructure. Or we've also configured, one of the big things we've spent a lot of time and energy on is building Web3 to Web2 Rails. Because a lot of this data ultimately is just stored in Web 2, right? There's a lot of DePIN projects out there that just have it on AWS or GCP or even just regular decentralized storage. So we made it very easy to bring that data across even from a Web 2 environment and have it be consumed from a Web 2 environment. And the other thing is, to everyone in the DePIN space that's building, watching this, man, so much respect for everything everyone is building out there. It is amazing. It is incredible. But as we all know, what you are building is hard enough. That's where we're here to help DePIN projects out, is on the data side. it's at least another thing that you don't need to build so that you can focus on building out that core infrastructure communication, focusing on those devices, right? Some of those pieces. So that's what we're really excited to just help DePIN projects with as well, is helping take that data piece off the table to help their users earn more and find new use cases for their technology.
Yeah, that was one of the other questions, Neal. I don't know if this is something you can speak to, but how are you enabling that value stream to go back to participants or community members or people that are actually producing the data within those projects specifically? Like, how does that stream either back to the project or to the individual users? Is that like a case by case, how projects enable it? But is that something you can unpack for us?
A little bit. So you said the answer. It's case by case. It really depends on how they've structured their, arguably their tokenomics, their reward distribution system. Who is there a reward for data usage? How they've handled to get to enterprise, even like their data governance, their data privacy framework. So the incentive structures in that DePIN project vary slightly. The nice thing is and Phil, please feel free to chime in, but we have a very configurable and flexible infrastructure and deployment. So I almost think of it as like logic-based business logic, like a configuration from a Web 2 sense on what you actually want to have. If you want to have all of it be rewarded to users, if it's more of a burn and elevating the network, and everything in between, quite frankly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'll add to that as we take a look at Demo. I think one of the things that's been so great about working with Demo as a partner is that they understand the importance of data privacy, and they understand the importance of respecting users' consent and wishes around how their data is handled, right? I think as much as we see a lot of things, and for those in the EU, you're very well aware of what GDPR is. For those that are in the US, you've maybe heard of CCPA, which is California's Data Protection Act.
Yep.
Lots of states are rolling them out. There's one thing that is a common across everything that will continue to be, I see is like the ultimate solution going forward, is you don't do anything with data unless you have a user's consent to do something, right? As long as you're following that user's consent, then it's fair game. It's generally fair game and inbounds, right? As long as you're not doing illegal stuff with the data. User consent around data usage is such a key piece. And I think that's where, in the case of Demo, that's been such a great view that they have and aligns with what we're doing, to the point where we can even start to get granular with things, right? As we look at how data is being used. It's not just, yes, I want to monetize my data via AI, but we've had conversations with Demo about, maybe I'm someone who, yes, I want to be able to monetize my vehicle data, but I want to do that in a way that it's going to help general AI companies, or it's going to help around loans and loan underwriting, but I don't want insurance companies to touch it, right? Because for better or for worse, there's ways it can help, but it can also be bad as well, especially in vehicle OEMs. We've seen plenty of stuff in the news recently about vehicle OEMs misusing data that they're getting from customers. We've built this in a way that those granular use cases can be applied. And that's where, as Neal said, it's a case-by-case basis, because that's relevant to Demo, but it may not be relevant to a geo or a mapping or a weather project, because they don't have vehicle OEM data, so it's not relevant there. So that configurability on a case-by-case basis is a key piece of how we support this space.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know that every time my insurance company calls to try to get me to plug in the dongle, that they can cut my rate by half. I have a hard objection to it, because I don't think my insurance rate would go down from time to time. You're running late to drop the kids off at school and you're going a little bit faster than you should be. I love that you have sort of those provisions built in. I know this is probably a little bit premature, but can you unpack the economic model of how all of this flows between, obviously, like, you've got the supply side with the projects that you're working on. The demand is going to presumably be from these AI models that are looking to get the data. But how does that kind of supply and demand on the economic side function? Can you, I assume it's also somewhat case by case, but can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some of it, to start to unpack it, I can unpack it at a theoretical high level, because, as you mentioned, there is some case by case to it. At the end of the day, I think what's really interesting and I talked about this a little bit earlier, the aggregation and bringing data together across products, right? The first thing on the supply side is stupid thing to say, but it's really a case of 1 + 1 = 3, right? The more data comes together, the more it starts to increase in value. And it's the classic Web3 network effect scenario, right? That's exactly what this is as we look at scaling out the value of that data. The more people that participate from DePINs and dApps and data sources, the more the more data starts to become valuable together. And it's interesting as well, because if you take a look at on the supply side, the types of things that can join data. So we already talked about wallet addresses, right? But let's talk about hexes, right? When it comes to geo and mapping, right? That's another thing that we can start to overlay as a common piece. So the more things that come to the table, the more building blocks you have in a set to build interesting things out. When we take a look at the demand side of that, I think it's also a case of the more supply that we have drives more demand, because it starts to open people's minds around what they can do with an AI model as they want to build something out or get access to data. If we think about a lot of the traditional crypto XAI use cases so far, a lot of it's been around trading, right? And thinking about trading data. Let's double down on that and say, okay, let's say you've got theories about how you're training your model to trade. But let's say you want to factor in weather to that, right? Because that's something that may impact how much time people are spending at their computer trading versus being outside and doing different things like that. As we start to get more and more pieces, that becomes more interesting things on the demand side that can drive up those capabilities.
I love it.
Like, obviously, you can tell Phil is the smarter of the two of us. I dumb it down even more. I'd say supply informs demand and vice versa.
Right.
It's like a transcontinental project. Like we know there's going to be demand for a railroad from the East Coast to the West Coast. And that's today's demand. Future demand will be very different once people go, oh, wait, look at that. There's a railroad there. And there's just projects that will be built up along those new rails and that new piping. The economics, the flow it can be completely user-based. It can be a combination. It can be, not all data is created equal too. So Alice and Bob can have different outputs and different rewards based on.
Sure. And your protocol is structured in a way where you can accommodate the fact that not all data is equal, and that can have its sort of free market, if you will, value within the protocol itself.
It's part of the secret sauce. Yeah.
That's part of the secret sauce.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we want to be able to solve in the long term as we build this out. Is everyone talks about crypto and it's the digital asset space, right? Okay, cool. Crypto is a digital asset. Well, data is a digital asset that existed long before crypto, and we still haven't figured out how to value it. So that's one of the really unique things that we want to solve as a key vision of this as well, is how do we use network economics and tokenization and token incentive to be able to value data and understand what it's valued at and do it in a way that it's fair and solve some of the problems that we see when a lot of the DePIN projects on here know you put incentive out there and airdrop farmers show up, and some of them are very real, doing very real things, producing great data, which is amazing. But there's also people that spend their time gaming the system, putting BS data into things. And there's no way to tell that right now. So that's one of the other things that we want to be able to help solve there. We've also got some things as we think about our mechanism design that we want to help projects solve around how do you fight sell pressure after an airdrop, right? If you have sold that token from the protocol, you're no longer participating as an owner of that network. Should you continue to earn on the data that you produced? Philosophically, I would argue not. And that's what some of the things that we've built in as we think about our mechanism design and other ways that we can help support DePINs beyond just helping users earn on their data.
Yeah, I love that you guys are looking at it from that perspective, especially knowing that you already alluded to the fact that these AI companies are going out and buying what was basically offline data that's no longer valuable, and they're paying hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for that. This is going to be a totally new paradigm. And the fact that you can have dynamic value as a part of how that gets bought and sold, I think is super interesting. And hopefully that's the baseline. It'll be worth way, way more than that as we build these new models, or as you guys are pulling that together. I think that's going to be a super important piece to the puzzle for you guys' success.
Yeah. And I think we're excited to see that go there. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the other things that I wanted to come back or circle back to that you talked about is this: what is DePIN, what's not DePIN? I know that you've got some potentially contrarian takes. This is a little bit outside of what you're doing specifically, but I'd love to pick your brain and hear your thoughts on that, because I know it's been a contentious, hotly debated topic in the space as of recent.
Yeah. I'll kick it off, and I know Neal's got some really interesting views as well, and we even both have slightly differing views as we think about some of this. As I take a look at DePIN, I don't think about it as just physical infrastructure from the top use cases around GPU or mobile hardware or network hardware. I think about it more from a standpoint of what are the things that exist in the real world right now that are centralized inside of networks, that are centralized on physical networks in places like, we'll take Google, for example, right? I'll keep picking on Google. Take a look at the value of Google. The value of Google is not the hardware that they have at GCP and that they have internally. It is not their GPU farms. It is not the storage that they have. It is the data that is on those. It is how they've brought that data together. And that data that they've brought together and own is really, at the end of the day, a centralized infrastructure network of digital data that's sitting on physical devices. So as much as separating those physical devices is one piece of it, the data that is powering those products and those networks and those businesses is, and I'll touch on the RWA asset of this, right? It's a thing that exists in the real world that is currently centralized, that we're starting to see the ability to decentralize across infrastructure networks. And I think that's what's really interesting about it. And I take a look at our view, and I'll take a very Beacon protocol specific view on this right now. And in order to do what we're talking about building in the Web 2 world, we would have to be sitting on everyone's data. We would have to have it stored. We would have to have control over it, everything. The way that we've built this network out is that everyone's still maintaining ownership. All of the DePIN projects still have a seat at the table. We still know where everything came from. And we become this on-chain orchestration and coordination layer with access controls on top. So we've taken what would traditionally be sitting in a giant data center somewhere or under one company's control, and we've decentralized that into an infrastructure network that's distributed from an ownership standpoint, as well as a physical location standpoint. So I think that's one of the things that I think we need to keep seeing a bigger view on, and taking that view of how do we take things that are existing in the real world right now and decentralize the ownership of them? Because it's a very different paradigm than taking a look at things like decentralizing currency, right? Decentralizing hardware, networks, pieces of information together, a very different approach. And I love that there's so much momentum behind this space right now. And I'm of the mindset of let's be wider in how we think about it and do more together, because that's how we're going to continue to grow and innovate. So I'll turn it over to you as well, because I know you've got some additional thoughts.
Largely agree. I keep it pretty simple. I'd say it's, like I said earlier, around Web3, decentralize everything. I'd see DePIN is very much an expression, a dialect in the same type of language. I do, being that self-proclaimed Bitcoin boomer, I still go back to the idea of the analog to the digital. So it's that, is it another expression or tangential to real world assets? Like, how do we tokenize and gain ownership of data? Does DePIN, through the creation of that data, converting analog signals into digital? I see it as just like another beating heart, or another organ in the system. Yeah, and it's very loose, I'd say. Yeah. But I'm also only 3 years in the space, so ask me in 3 more years.
Yeah, I think you're certainly on to the right track with how you're thinking about it. You use the Google example. The physical and the digital are inextricably linked. There's a reason Google offers 50 gigs of free storage and free email and all these free things. It's because the cost for the hardware is negligible. It's everything that they're storing that is where they actually create value for. It's the reason they give it away for free, is because they're able to monetize it. And you need both sides of that equation to really capture the full value. To go back to your 1 and 1 is 3, that is truly the case. And so I think you're right with expanding the term, and there will be the maxis that say, no, it's only the hardware. But I think history has shown that's probably not going to be the case. And that's okay. We'll see how that conversation transpires.
What's the current meta? What's the current kind of mainstream definition?
There's been a lot of, it's always a conversation. It's always an argument. There was a very widely discussed conversation that our friend Connor, who does the Proof of Coverage pod, he posted something, his takes on what's deep and what's, and it sparked so much conversation. Unironically, or maybe ironically, a few days prior to that, I had started drafting an article that was going to talk about how are we thinking these things. And you're starting to see the bifurcation, or sort of the smaller, like the DVINs and the the energy degen. And so as we're fragmenting these things out, I was like, hey, and then I'm glad I didn't publish it, because I probably would have taken a ton of flack given how much arguments and conversation was going. I just got to passively watch it on the wall. But I think you will start to see people try to break out like the wireless side of DePIN or the energy side, but at the end of the day, it's all one and the same. It's all under the same umbrella. And I don't know if we've moved the needle in terms of what the meta is on how people are thinking about this, but I like to keep it fairly broad. And as long as folks aren't using it for just the marketing narrative and they're saying they're a DePIN when they genuinely are not involved in anything DePIN related, I think that's where I personally draw the line. But I don't know if others have the same take. We're still in that expanding the pie era. And you certainly, if we start to exclude what is considered, all of this boils down to networks that revolve around physical infrastructure that in some way, shape, or form tie back into the network value. So it's hard to say that they're not in the circle, if you will.
Yeah,
You're saying everyone's arguing over the toppings of one slice of a very large pizza?
Exactly.
And I like the view of DeFi, right, is a huge category, right? There's a lot of subcategories underneath DeFi. Yeah. And for those of us that have been building not in DeFi, I think a lot of it is we've all been looking for a home or a group or a narrative or what are we, right? Because you look at, okay, great, here's the market value of DeFi. Now you've got a category to look at, okay, here's the market value of DePIN. And I think that's another piece of it is as well, is how do we lean into that so that it's more together and that we have a category that starts to build awareness, because building the awareness is such a key piece of adoption, and especially look at mainstream adoption, right? That's what we're on the cusp of. And I think that's what's so great about what's going on here as well, is it's another category that's driving mainstream adoption of crypto and decentralized technology.
Yeah. And the other thing that I love about DePIN specifically is the fact that you're seeing all these narratives or the metas of it's like we get a cycle every couple of years. It was DeFi, and then there's like NFTs and all this crap. There's like the ICO back in the 17 era. And now you're seeing projects that are actually not only solving real world problems, but they're making money by appealing to just normal, regular, everyday users who really don't care that much about crypto. And so the success trajectory has been, I think, just astronomically greater than any of these other cycles that we've seen. And so it's great that we have a home and that you're playing in a world where there is actual real value being created from this. It's not just a bunch of degens that are sitting in their computer trading cryptos all day, but it is a fundamentally different thing. And so knowing that there's momentum behind it, but the value is actually being created on or captured on both sides is pretty incredible. And you guys are right at the intersection of being able to amplify that and take it to whole new levels, which I think is just so great.
Thanks, man. We're trying.
Yeah. So what's next for the team, for the project? Where do you guys go from here? I know you've got projects that you're working with. You've got tools out there. What's the next phase for Beacon?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the things is, if you're an investor watching, let's chat. We're always looking to connect with investors who are interested in this space. Same thing with DePIN projects that are producing data, or people that are doing decentralized AI, or even if you're even outside of AI, if you still have demand use cases around getting access to this data and ways that fuel the usage, let's chat. So I think one of the key things we're focused on right now is continuing to build out those relationships. One of the things that's really exciting is we have a whole ton of partnerships that we have not publicly announced yet. We're at a point where we're actually backlogged on our public announcement calendar because we want to ensure that every partner that we're working with, we're spending adequate time and resource and helping build out a wait list, right? Like we did with Demo and Allura. So definitely keep an eye on those things coming out. Very soon, the Eclipse Data Hub is going to be going live. And as that goes live, it's going to start to be about how do we continue to build out and bridge these data ecosystems, right? How do we find places to connect into new data? How do we start to push the limits of compute on data and what we can start to do on building out privacy preserving inferences on things, and really just continuing to scale and grow. And where I'm really excited to see this go is to see something where we're powering the next generation of AI projects that are getting started. Because I like to say, sure, if you're OpenAI or Anthropic or Meta, you pick up the phone and call someone and say, hi, I'd like to buy access to your data. Let's figure this out. Who's not going to take that call and say, yes, I want to talk about it? But if you're not one of those, it's a real tough solution, right? That's what we want to be able to support. And that's where the more that we can bring DePINs and dApps together to be able to bring and produce this data and connect it with AI and data consumers, we can start to build out some really interesting things. Really, it's all about continuing to build out the scale and really seeing things come to life from here, and looking at some of the amounts of really increasing the data points on the network. It's funny, Neal and I were talking about, we're doing some quick back of the envelope of what data production looks like just with the current partners that we haven't announced. And our back of the envelope is 180 million net new data points per month. That's a lot of data production. And that's not including a lot of the people that are watching this that we're not even talking to yet. So where do we get to a point that becomes a million, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, a billion data points being produced and made available and connected a month? That's the future of where data is going to go. And that's what we're excited to build out with everyone.
Yeah, that's an incredible amount of data, and I know that these AI models need it. It's great that you're helping supply that for them. Kind of touching on your contrarian take of what is deep and what's not DePIN, I'm curious, are you guys looking at other, what would traditionally not be considered a DePIN project, like, DeFi or other just Web3 things? Is there a value in orchestrating that data as well that you can provide? Are you guys thinking about that? It looks like there's a solid yes, but I'm just curious how that fits.
That's a great point, Tyler, because not all data is created equal. Data is different value, but together that orchestration component, that additive are net new products. If it's weather data over BTC USDC trade pairs by geo, there's a lot of really unique insights you can build from oracles and from what are quote unquote public data. Yeah, like it's any and all data is welcome. We think we know what our initial kind of playbook is from like a football head coach kind of standpoint, but I'm sure that we're only looking at 5% of what's actually possible and what's actually valuable for the market.
Sure.
Downstream going forward.
And I'd add as well, even there's also value in Web 2 data coming to the table here, right? So we also have some data partners that are producing Web 2 data that are things like mobile device data that can be used as linkage across data sets. Because if I've got different wallets on different networks that aren't able to tie up or see that, I think there's some ways to be able to use the data that's being produced from Web 2 in a way to bring this together as well. So as much as our focus right now is definitely around DePINs and dApps, yeah, we have some Web 2 customers that we work with as well. And we also are, one of the things that we're looking at as well and chatting right now with is some oracles and some on-chain data companies, because that's what's another cool angle of this, as I mentioned, with bringing weather data to trading. One of the other things we're not even thinking of, how can a neural net learn from, I'll go back to Demo, like telemetry data inside vehicles is something that, unless you're Tesla, probably haven't been able to do AI training on before. So what can neural nets start to learn by just understanding data that happens inside of vehicles and things like that? I think there's a lot of really interesting things outside of just DePIN and dApp that become interesting here, and it can be an intersection for all data as well.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And you talked about the trading. Like, I know all these crazy hedge fund people, like they're looking at things that people aren't looking at, where it's weather related. If you're having maybe chain buy, sell, DeFi related data points with something like weather or transportation, that could be super interesting for those folks. I know they pay big money to be able to have an edge on something that everybody else is not looking at, and tying all that together puts you in a really good position to be able to have a lot of demand from people with big pocketbooks.
And from a go-to-market standpoint, we're not sitting on data; we are facilitating. That's
facilitating it.
We're the piping, the wrapper in the piping that helps the better rails for this to happen. And yeah, so it's not It's not a Web 2, give us your data and we'll go sell it for you. No, it's very much a Web 3 native approach.
I think that's important, and it's great that you guys you have that as the focal point, because I know that people that are going to want to opt in, you're definitely going to appreciate that, just knowing what the current model looks like. Gosh, guys, this has been so much fun. I love what you're doing. I'm surprised that people haven't already started thinking about this. I think you're 100% on the right track with what needs to happen. There's so much extra value capture that you're going to bring back to these networks, to all of the other folks that are buying it. It's just going to be a net positive for the world. For people that want to stay up to date, learn more about what you're doing, where can folks go find more?
Yeah, I think that the best way is follow us on Twitter, or X. I guess I have to acknowledge it as X. Follow us on X. We're at Beacon Protocol, just as you'd think it's spelled, Beacon and Protocol together. That's probably the best way to stay up to date and to see all of the new partnership announcements that are coming out. Engage with us. Our DMs are always open.
That's great. And we'll definitely be sure to link all that down below. We'll get the Twitter, we'll get the website, or X. I know I go back and forth myself, but we'll definitely get that for folks. If you are a DePIN project, go chat with these guys. Sounds like they've got a nice backlog of projects, but hopefully there'll be some room for more folks coming in. I assume that's the case. And if you're just an individual interested, go check it out, because if you're involved with DePIN, there's a very good chance the project that you're working with is probably going to get value that would come back to you for being involved. So we'll definitely have all that down below. But Neal, Phil, I want to thank you guys again. This was an awesome conversation. I'm really excited about what you're building and excited to see all the traction that starts to come from it.
Thanks, Tyler. This is a lot of fun.
Yes, it's great. Thank you so much, Aaron. It's fantastic talking.
It's been great. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.